Hey, what's up, Jeff? Quick demo video for you for your Absolution by Nevin Varner over at Space Junk. This might not be a quick demo. I've got a lot to say about this guy. So this was an extremely tough build. It was just very unique. It's not something that I recommend for someone who's watching this and thinking of getting ideas of building a Saber or putting some electronics in it. I wouldn't recommend doing it this way. I had a hell of a time trying to get this guy installed, right? And we'll go over all that. But this install the Proffie V2. It's got CCSabers LEDs in here for your main pixel. You got your blade retention, which is right here. This is a 2-button setup. So the top tactile, that's your activation, and then the bottom tactile here, that's your auxiliary. Just a special shout out to my buddy Mac. He's a fellow smuggler. He actually gave me the STL file for the tactile switch holder in here. So thanks, Mac. You know, that saved me a lot of time having to model that up. This card, you know, when this card came to me, it just fit in that slot. It was thick enough where there wasn't any play. I had to sand and Dremel this card down paper thin to get it to work. Let me see if I can take it out, which was a little nerve-wracking. You know, because I didn't want to go through the card, and I take most of the material off with a Dremel, and then I finish it off with some sandpaper just so it can be smooth. But if I could show you that, I mean, that thing is just like super thin all the way down, right? You could see through it if you could see my finger in the light, but yeah, I could see right through it. So, you know, it works good now. I'm gonna put it back in. It slides in, and then this clamp here locks it into place, which is pretty sweet. So everything's working really good there. This is a removable chassis. So what you want to do is you want to open this guy up from right here. It's the only place it opens. So take this out, and then here is your chassis. We're going to go over the Saber first, and then I'll tell you what I did with the chassis here in a moment. So the inside of this Saber, from about right where my finger's at to right here, there's a large diameter in there. So I thought I'd have all the room in the world to work. Problem is this coupler right here to put this pommel on. It is 0.99 inches to get through there, and it doesn't come off. So originally I thought, well, okay, that's fine. I'll come over here and I'll take this piece off and I'll work my way that way. This piece doesn't come off. So I had all this room to work in this handle, and I couldn't use it because my only access was right here, and it's 0.99 inches to get through here. So, and I had to make this a removable chassis so you could have a removable battery. So you can see your 14-pin PCB. That's a Smuggler's Outpost switch pixel set. It's all I use. You can see it in there, but what you can't see because there's no light in there is that is actually from about right here to right here. That thing is free floating. So it is 0.99 inches in diameter, okay, because I had to put it through here to get all the way in the back. It had to come through this way and in here. But the inside handle is larger than 0.99. So there's a gap all the way between that chassis piece. What I had to do to make sure that stayed perfectly center was I had to figure out the ID of this small coupler piece right here so that I can make a press fit down into here. But I couldn't get to it with a mic, right? So like I got my mic over here. I'm trying to mic it with one eye, you know, figuring it out. I thought I had it. I printed out my first piece way off, you know, like it was way too big. So I printed another one. It was way too small. And I did that about 5 times. And each time I progressively got better. And then the last time, on my last print, it was exactly the way I wanted it to be. I actually printed it just a tad large, and then I sanded it a little bit. And sanding is something that you need to watch out for when you do these removable chassis too, because if you're gonna sand it, the chassis, you need to sand it evenly all the way around. If you happen to take off just a little bit off, just too much off of one side and you put it in, all of a sudden those pins are off center now, right? So that takes a long time to do, and make sure you get it perfect. But I had to put it all the way in there. And then with some tools, I had to press fit it down into this piece right here so that it stayed nice and tight. It's perfectly centered in there and it's not going anywhere. And then I had to fish the switch wires out this way, which was another story. But you know, that's, I mean, fishing the switch wires out, that's kind of normal install stuff. This thing right here on this setup that I did with this Saber, probably nobody's ever done this before. And then there's a good reason for that, right? Like, it's a super bad idea if you don't get it exactly right, because if these pins don't line up with this PCB right here in these traces, if they don't line up correctly, your Saber is going to have a really bad day, you know, when you fire it up. So I was super nervous. I was all prepared to tear this out if it didn't work, but it was the only idea that I had that I could try. So I spent a lot of time trying to implement it, and it worked out great, right? So that's this Saber, you know, that's this piece. Now onto your chassis. Your chassis comes out of the pommel right here. It's a press fit. Just be careful when you're pulling it out. It's made to be super tight in this guy, but it's also made to where you can pull it out so that you can put your battery in and out, right? So you've got your Proffie board up here, removable battery down here. This battery cradle is a lot shorter than I usually do, so I did smash down the positive terminal, and I cut most of the springs off of the negative side here. So the negative side will actually be over here by your PCB. But nice and clean, everything's looking good. You've got a 28mm Smuggler's Outpost Elite speaker in here. It sounds great. This Saber's super loud. So anyway, with this chassis, you know, from right here to right here, this is 0.99 inches because again, I had to get through this coupler. But if I go through that coupler and I go like that, you can see how much that's wobbling around. And that's not good for pin lineup, right? So what I needed to do was figure out a way to get this to stay straight. And how I did that was this back piece, you can see that that's thicker. I made this so that it is enough of a press fit to go in here, and it's long enough where this will hold it perfectly straight, right? So let's throw a battery in and then we'll kind of walk through it. Remember, spring side, negative. So once you put your battery in, I'm actually gonna put the sticker on the battery. I'm gonna face that inside the chassis because you don't want that sticking out. This thing is the super tight tolerances on this guy, right? So we got the battery in. Now we're gonna take this and we're gonna put it in here. It only goes in one way. So if you're off just a hair, it's not gonna go, right? So just take your time with it. You'll feel it when it starts. And then when it starts, push it all the way in until it stops. There's a little, let me turn this off real quick. There's a little spacer that I put in here that I forgot to show you, but I'll show you when we take the battery out. It sits in between this pommel and the face of the speaker, and it's exactly 0.38 inches wide, or wide, because that's exactly how far I needed this chassis to stick out from this guy, right? So now that we've got this in there, this is perfectly straight, it's steady and sturdy, it's not moving on you. You can now in turn take this and put it in here. Now until these threads start to line up, this chassis is going to be wobbly. So I made sure that the pins and the PCB don't touch each other until... I made sure that the pins and the PCB do not make contact until you're 3/4 of the way done tightening up this pommel. I'm screwing it in. I can feel it starting to tighten right now. That's about how much space you have in there before these pins start engaging that PCB on the chassis. And I did that to make sure that everything was lined up on the threads and perfectly centered before everything started touching each other. So there won't be any misalignment on the PCB, if that makes sense, right? Now that we've got this all the way in and tightened down, twist off. Next sound font.
They're pod racing on Alistair. Very fast, very dangerous.
We can come up here to activation. Auxiliary. We can tap it again and turn it off. And we'll throw a blade in it. This does take a 1-inch blade. I'm gonna tighten the blade down. So, everything is lined up perfectly, and it's lined up about right here inside your chassis. Right here, right in front of this this switch housing. If it wasn't lined up, your switches wouldn't work, or your blade wouldn't work, something wouldn't work, right? But you've got basically 3 functions of those pins touching each other. You've got your activation, your auxiliary, and your main PCB. So
now this is pod racing.
Go to the next one.
I know the true power of the dark side.
We'll go to a soundtrack. You might hit another one later so you could, that has a little bit of a different soundtrack so you can hear how loud it is, but then this thing's super loud. Blade lock up. You don't have to be worried about hitting this thing because this piece of the chassis is super tight and press fitted in here. This back chassis that has your board is super tight into this pommel. So for all intents and purposes, I mean, it's locked in together. There will not be any shifting. I mean, this thing's a beast.
The child.
Blade lock up.
Krogan?
Yes, that's his name. He was raised at the Jedi Temple at Coruscant. Many masters trained him over the years.
Just like that. And then we'll take this out. So you can see everything's working exactly like it should. Super proud of this build because it was tricky as hell. But so we'll take the blade out and then we'll just take the chassis out. We'll do the same thing. We want to come over here from the pommel and we just want to unscrew it. Everything will stay nice and steady until you get past the threads. And then when you're past the threads, that's when you've got that wobbliness like that, but your pins aren't engaged in your PCB anymore. So you can just come over here and pull it out just like that. And we're gonna come over here with our chassis. We'll carefully just pull it out of the pommel. Be gentle with it, it comes right out. And then you come over here from the positive side of the battery and pull it out with your finger just like that. And then we can take this guy and just put it back in here for safekeeping. Push it down all the way. Oh, sorry, I forgot to show you that. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but there is a 3D printed spacer in there that's 0.38 inches wide. And that serves 2 purposes, right? One, it keeps the speaker off the back of the pommel so you don't have any sound distortion. And then also, it acted as a way for me to bump this chassis out enough to where I needed it to make contact with these pins, and I could control how far out the chassis was when everything was engaged in. So we'll just go ahead and put this back in and then carefully push it all the way in. It goes in, but then it's nice and firm. This thing's not going anywhere. I also printed this particular chassis with a bit of a higher infill than I usually do to make it a bit more sturdy because there's going to be a lot of pushing and pulling on it. So if you be careful, this thing will last a long time. It's made to take a little bit of abuse, you know, more so than I would some other chassis that I do, because I'm not putting that tension of pulling and pushing on them all the time. So this was printed specifically for that purpose. And then one last thing on your Saber, let's go ahead and throw the chassis in. Let's screw this guy in. Just like that. Now I know I was originally going to try to light this guy up, this lens here. There was just no way that I could do it. I mean, I went from the beginning having, you know, that idea that I would light it up, and then towards the end of this install, man, I was just happy that I could do it because I didn't think I'd be able to pull this one off. But I mean, it was impossible for me to put an LED in that lens because of where it's at. You see how it's lined up right there with the tip of the switch housing. That's exactly where my chassis stops, the one piece that's holding the PCBs in. It stops here. So a pixel would have interfered with that PCB, and I couldn't have that pixel light resting on my PCB. That's just not a good way to do things. For one, it takes the security or the sturdiness of the PCB off, and then I don't want those two electrical components touching each other. So I just couldn't do that, so apologies for that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, that's pretty much your Saber. You know, if you got any questions, please let me know. If not, this will go out in the mail to you tomorrow. Thanks, Jeff.